Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? I am back once again, slightly later than scheduled, almost 10 minutes late. It just the night just gets away with me, getting back, getting set up and everything. But I'm here. I'm here to talk about another James Bond film, and this is quite a special one. This is a fan favorite. Of course, talking about Goldeneye, directed by Martin Campbell. This is the 1995 James Bond movie. Um, Starring the one and only Pierce Brosnan in his debut as Bond. Some would argue the TV commercials that he did before. He's very much in the James Bond character, but officially, Pierce Brosnan is in, and Timothy Dalton is sadly out at this point. We're going to go into like the whole behind the scenes of it and everything because it's very interesting surrounding Goldeneye and the lead up to it and what ultimately became of it. Boom, in the comments, as always, we've got Carl. Hope you're doing good, my friend. I look forward to talking about Bond every week, but it's also good to touch base and catch up. But I hope you're doing well, my friend. Okay, so let's do a blast of the socials. You know the score by now. Subscribe for more movie reviews, discussions, and live streams. I can't post anything official yet, but there might be some fun reviews coming up. Early screener, potentially, of something, which I'm not at liberty to say just yet. But do subscribe, stay tuned. It's going to be really, really fun. That's all I'm going to say. So I'm going to keep it for that for now. I'm going to, and just, it's all about the anticipation. All about the anticipation. And you can follow me on Twitter as well, at Hobbit Fan Editor. And when I can divulge what I will be reviewing, it will go straight on my Twitter. So give me a follow on there at Hobbit Fan Editor. And let me know what you think of Goldeneye. Your past surrounding Goldeneye. Did you play the video game? Did you watch the movie? Is it one of your favorite Bond films? Anything regarding James Bond, please do let me know. And because, we had to say goodbye to the very short-lived Timothy Dalton era of Bond, let me know who your favorite James Bond is and what your favorite James Bond film is. We do enter a new James Bond today with Pierce Brosnan, so that's going to be fun. We've got him for another 3 weeks after this, and then we move on to Daniel Craig. Oh, the joys. Well, every Bond has positives and negatives, every single one does. And we're going to talk about those. So, Goldeneye, sort of my history with Goldeneye. I watched this film for the first time last year. And what's interesting is now I've seen this film, as of tonight, I've seen this film 3 times, 2 of which have been on the cinema screen. My first time watching this film last year was on the big screen. Shortly after that, I then watched it on the small screen. And now within a year, I didn't anticipate going back to the James Bond films as quickly as I have done. I don't regret it at all. Like, it's been brilliant, going back through them. And as I said, like, my opinions might change on them, which is the entire purpose that I wanted to talk about them again. I don't like repeating things in exactly the same way. So at least coming at it with the angle of, has my opinion changed on a film, seeing some of these films for the first time on the big screen. But I can't say that seeing Goldeneye tonight on the big screen is my first time seeing it on the big screen, because that would have been last year. I went last year to the Prince Charles Cinema to watch it. I had absolute blast watching it. It was really good fun seeing it there. And as any kind of crowd at the Prince Charles Cinema, if you've ever been there, if you know the cinema, if you any screening, it's like a fan favorite. All the films that play there are fan favorites, and the atmosphere in the crowd is just fantastic. And it was kind of the same again tonight. That people weren't as vocal. People didn't seem like they was laughing as much or engaging with the film as much as they did in London last year. But it was a sold-out screening, and I think that says it all, to be honest. As the weeks gone by, you can always tell which are the most popular James Bond films based on asses in seats, basically. And this one legitimately was sold out. I didn't see a single free seat, in that entire screening. So, yeah, GoldenEye still got staying power, even in 2022. And I wonder how much of that is nostalgia. I'm guessing that, I was 2 years old at the time, so I can't vouch for the success of GoldenEye at the time. But I imagine that this one, for a lot of people, is very nostalgic. You had the 6-year hiatus between License to Kill and this one. License to Kill had kind of middling reviews. A lot of people were negative against it because of the higher rating. It was rated 15. It was a lot more harder edged and maybe alienated some of the younger demographic and everything like that. It's not until, fairly recently that License to Kill's had this huge cult following now and is arguably regarded as one of the best Bond films, the best Bond film, in my opinion. But that just, that's to my personal taste with these films. So he had 6 years, and I think ultimately, I mean, you can read more about this and it goes way more in depth, but essentially what happened was MGM, I think, were going broke, and the rights to MGM were up for grabs, basically. And there were loads of different studios vying for control. There was Pathé Entertainment, and they were going to sort of merge the two companies together. There were counter lawsuits. It was just absolute, lawsuit hell, basically, what happened in that 6-year interim between License to Kill and this one. And there are some rough drafts of what the plot for a third Dalton film would have been. I think it was going to be based in China. And it sounded really cool. It legitimately sounded really cool. I think there were a bunch of different ideas that developed with the Dalton ones, but essentially with 6 years, I think he was on a 7-year contract, I think Dalton was. And ultimately his contract would have expired in 1993. So by the time, 94 rolls around and they're finally ready to make a Bond film to be released in 95, he kind of was, he was a bit against the idea at that point because his contract was basically over and so many years had passed and nothing had happened. I imagine he'd kind of become a little bit diluted to the character maybe at that point. But I think eventually he did come round and he did reconsider coming back. However, he only wanted to come back under the stipulation that he'd be back for one film, which I can understand. As I said, Timothy Dalton never really struck me as a Bond that would stick around for ages, certainly not to the level of like 7 films, such as Roger Moore, for example. And I could always see him just doing a trilogy. And I see both sides to this. Dalton, 6 years had passed and he only wants to do one more and then they'd have to recast the character again. The Bond franchise had been gone for 6 years, which is a long amount of time for a franchise to be gone for and to stay current, and to come back with one Bond and then as soon as that one film is done, you've then got to recast again. I can understand the need after a 6-year gap to rebrand just completely and get a new Bond in. So I can see it from both sides. I am gutted we never got a third Dalton film. I think it would have been very interesting to see. Apparently it was going to be an amalgamation of The Living Daylights and License to Kill. And I think that tone would have worked absolutely beautifully. And I would have been very curious to have seen what would have happened. Unfortunately, the third Dalton film exists in a parallel universe somewhere, and we didn't get it. And what we did get was Goldeneye. And we'll get into the film very shortly. Carl says the Goldeneye video game has helped with its popularity. I completely agree. A good movie tie-in game can do wonders for it. And I must admit, actually, this might be a shocking admission to a lot of you. I've never played it. I haven't seen anything from the game, actually. I haven't watched a Let's Play. I haven't seen any videos on it. I've never played it. I was always a PlayStation guy, so I never got around to it. And I know they remade it fairly recently, but I heard that the remake wasn't that great. I could probably emulate it if I really wanted to, but I've just never got around to it. But I have heard that the video game is fantastic. And yeah, I definitely agree that the video game... And that's like a different audience as well, though, isn't it? I actually don't know if there were any James Bond video games before Goldeneye. I haven't done my research on that because I don't know if Goldeneye was like this tour de force of this, the first James Bond video game that was like hot out of the gate. And that's also why Goldeneye was popular. Or if you maybe got some more bare bones video games of James Bond prior to Goldeneye. But that's what I mean with Goldeneye being so popular. A lot of people really enjoyed the film. It made a lot of money critically. It was much more well received than License to Kill was. And also from the video game demographic and that marketing side of things, you're opening up James Bond to this whole new audience. It's a fresh face of Bond. We're in the mid-90s now. Everything's changed, politically as well. That forms the basis of this film. the Cold War is over, that basically the foundation of why the James Bond character exists and how he's operated so long in the films before this point was that he was always against the Russians. It was always Cold War related. There's so many James Bond films like that. And within those 6 years, you know, you had the fall of the Berlin Wall. You had this complete change politically, to the point where I think even studios were considering, was the James Bond character obsolete now? Was there a place for James Bond as a fictional lead in films now that that was all said and done? And thankfully we can say that yes, there is still a need for the character of James Bond, more so than ever. And with that comes a few changes and a few tweaks, and there are more things in this than I noticed even last year watching it for the first time. So yeah, popular James Bond films, one of the favorites. Now, do I think, especially after watching it again, do I think that it is deserving of all of that hype? Yes and no. And this might annoy a lot of people here. Brosnan's great. I do love Brosnan as Bond. But the films that he's in, they're just kind of okay to me. Goldeneye is by far the best of the four, without a question of a doubt. And I don't mind Tomorrow Never Dies as well. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing that on the big screen next week. This was okay. Goldeneye is okay to me. It's fun. It's a fun, safe Bond film. It does very much feel like a return to form. I don't know, rewatching it again tonight, it didn't hit as hard as it did last year for me, a little bit. And I'm wondering if, because last year I went in, you know, I was going through a lot of the Bond films for the first time last year. I was surrounded by a lot of the hype, and don't get me wrong, I still do enjoy this film. And I raced out of work today to get to the cinema to watch this thing. It's been a very, very busy day, so I apologize if I seem a little bit tired or lethargic compared to how I usually am. I'm still absolutely loving watching these Bond films on the big screen. And maybe it's because I love License to Kill so much, and that has kind of tarnished this, but this does feel completely different, the tone of it, and that's mostly aided by the music as well. And we will get to the music, because more so than ever this week, the music deserves its own section. But yeah, this film's just okay to me. It's fine. I like a lot of the characters. I think that's the strongest thing for me in this film. The characters, the side characters, the henchwoman. The characters are great. The characters are really fun and entertaining. But I don't know if it's something about the pacing of the film. It's difficult to put my finger on, or just the overall tone of the film. Something didn't hit with me as much tonight as it has done before. And hopefully by the end of this review, I'll figure out why that is. But don't get me wrong, I still very much enjoy Goldeneye. But when people say like, "Oh, Goldeneye is the best Bond film," you know, they hold it in the pantheon of the creme de la creme of Bond. I wouldn't hold it that high. It's just kind of it's an above average Bond film. I'll say that it's a fun film, but I would not hold it in that pantheon of, you know, like the greatest of all times. That's just me. That's just me. As I say, like, as this is an open conversation, I don't have a plan for this thing. Feel free to chip in, and hopefully by the end of it, we'll kind of dissect my opinion and maybe why this didn't hit as hard for me this time. But we'll find out. We'll go through it. We have a new Bond in Pierce Brosnan, so let's talk about Brosnan. Brosnan was good for the role even before Dalton. Brosnan was on the cards, as I mentioned. He was tied into a TV show at the time. The name escapes me. I always forget the name of it. He was tied into a TV show which was coming to an end, and he was about to make the move into playing Bond. Like, he would have got the part without a doubt. It was a dead cert. Brosnan was going to get the part. And due to the popularity of him almost being Bond, the TV syndication that was running his TV show at the time decided to renew the series for one more series and exercise the clause in their contract where Brosnan couldn't leave. The Broccolis and everyone, understandably, didn't want someone in a popular spy franchise, TV franchise, and also playing Bond at the same time, so they decided to go with Dalton. And then that show was cancelled after like 5 episodes or something like that, which must have been a really, really shit experience for Pierce Brosnan, especially because, you know, I genuinely believe with Brosnan, he would have been like that next Roger Moore. I think he would have just made film after film after film. I think he would have made 7, just like Roger Moore did, or even more. Who knows? That's just me guessing. I could be totally wrong about that, but as it is, he made 4, which still feels very short-lived. And I guess it feels short-lived because we have seen two Bonds do more films than Pierce Brosnan did altogether. And it's just a shame because I think he would have been good for it. I think he loved playing the character, and to me, he is that successor to Roger Moore. He's the closest in feel to Roger Moore for me, is Pierce Brosnan. He's quippy again. He's romantic. He's suave. It goes back to that kind of thing. Dalton was suave, but he was haunted, and you could tell that he was probably the most accurate to the book James Bond, in which case, he was dealing with a lot of these demons. He wasn't as quippy, and when he did it, didn't feel right. He was much more violent, and he was drinking and chain smoking and all of that stuff. This felt more like a more jovial, fun, swashbuckling, I guess, kind of Bond is almost a way that I put it. I do love Pierce Brosnan as Bond, and in many ways, growing up in the 90s, I wasn't really privy to a lot of the Bond films growing up. The big one for me, as I think I mentioned this last week, was Die Another Day. That was the big one that I remember. I remember all the trailers for it. Was there a video game for Die Another Day? I feel like there was. I could be wrong about that. But I remember the posters. My friends were going nuts for it. Everyone I knew was like going to see the new Bond film. I never went to see it. I wasn't a Bond fan at the time. I've only become, I'm a very recent Bond fan in many ways. But I'd say Brosnan was my generation's Bond just because he was the first one that I was aware of. And he's great. He is really, really great. This is my favorite of the Brosnan 4 for definite. I'm going to have to rewatch the other 3, though, to say which one I think his performance was the best in. Because I've mentioned before how the first film, or even the first couple of films sometimes in a Bond's legacy, is almost like a transitionary period. It's almost like they're still writing them in a way that harkens back to a previous Bond. And I don't think that's the case with Brosnan. As I've said, like he feels like Roger Moore, but he feels enough of his own. But I don't know if with this film he was totally comfortable in the role just yet. So I'm going to have to watch like Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough to really see if he comes into his own more in those films. Maybe he felt like the pressure was on with this one, but I still think he's great. And the opening scene at is it the Contra Dam? Is that the name of it? Which I really want to do at some point. I would love to do that bungee jump. I've never bungee jumped in my life. If I only bungee jump once in my lifetime, I want it to be that one. And you got to T-pose. You got to do like the amount of people that probably do that, on a daily basis. But I have looked into it actually, so don't rule it out. If I ever do it, I'll let you guys know. But I think it'd be fantastic to do. 750 meters, I believe it is. I could be wrong, but I think it's 750 meters. It's a great opener, and it reminds me in many ways of the opening to Living Daylights in that you have that delayed reveal of Bond, which I always think is necessary for a new Bond. Roger Moore never got that, and it always feels weird to me. It always feels very matter-of-fact, the introduction of Roger Moore, but absolute top-tier introduction to Bond in this one. We're just seeing him run along the top of the dam, bungee jumping off. You don't get a proper face reveal until much later in the film. Oh, well, much later into that opening scene. So, yeah, I don't think you could ask for a better opening scene to a Bond film. Like, I really do. Like, this is up there for me in terms of the best Bond opener. It's just a shame about the music, and we will talk about the music later on, don't you worry. Very quickly, we're introduced to some of the other characters as well, right from that opening scene. We've got the great Sean Bean, the great Scene Bean, playing Alec Trevelyan. And I like that idea of Bond being in the field, being on a mission with a fellow 00 agent, 006 and 007 on a mission together. I think originally the character was written to be much older. I think Alan Rickman was touted to play the character, and there was another actor as well that I'm forgetting. And he was meant to be more of a mentor figure to Bond in the field, and then his mentor was going to ultimately turn against him and be the main villain of the piece. But they changed their minds, and they went with more of a peer of James Bond rather than a mentor. I think it could have worked either way, in all honesty, but we haven't really seen Bond have any kind of mentor figure really throughout the other film, so maybe that would have been a little bit strange seeing that. So I think it was the right decision ultimately to go with more of a peer of James Bond, and Sean Bean plays it brilliantly. We do get a very sudden 9-year... I'm going to sneeze. Am I going to sneeze? I'm doing that face. I'm doing that face when, you know, you want to sneeze and it's not coming. I think it's gone away, guys. Sorry about that. Must be allergies or something like that. Yeah, and then we get like a 9-year time jump, and it's just like, whoa, okay. And then all of a sudden, Sean Bean's a villain. Of course, it goes into the backstory, and he does have this sort of like very convoluted backstory of how he wants to trigger an EMP from space that will plunge London and the world into a global financial crisis. He's going to extract the funds first, so he's basically just doing it for money. But then there's also another motive that he's doing it because he comes from... His parents were Cossacks who were treated unfairly by the British, who sent all of the Cossacks back to Soviet Russia, where they were all murdered, and God only knows what else. So he wants to get revenge on England for doing that for his parents, but also he's just stealing money. And I think in terms of like motives, I like the family dynamic a lot better, that his parents were Cossacks and stuff like that. The rest of it is just, oh, he's out for money. And they do try and address that in the film. There's an exchange that Bond has with him where he says like, oh, you know, you're just doing it for money. You're no better than a common thief. And Sean Bean kind of counters it and tries to dance around it, but ultimately you're like, no, you're really just doing this for money. And Sean Bean's character just doesn't seem like he's fussed about money. Like, what's he gonna buy? Was he gonna buy a bigger helicopter? Like, I don't know. It seems like quite an easy motive. It's like, oh, we've got a villain. Oh, what does he want? He wants money. You know, he's gonna hold people to ransom for money or something like that. And I don't know. It just seems weak. It feels like a weak motivation to me. There's other motivations in there, though, so I can't say that he's a weak character, because there are other motives of the villain that kind of bolster his character up more. But that's predominantly the one they keep focusing on. You know, they're hacking in and they're extracting the money and they're going to doom the world into a financial crisis. And it's just like, oh, okay. So it's a mixed bag for me. I do love the idea of Sean Bean's character, though, being, you know, with James Bond in the field, faking his own death and being caught up in this whole thing. Oh, God, excuse me. Sorry, guys. We got Nikki in the comments. How are you doing? It's been a while. She says, this movie shaped my childhood. Yeah, and I imagine it did with a lot of people too. And that's why this film continues to be so popular. You know, Carl mentioned earlier as well, the video game as well as the film, as well as a fresh face for Bond, a fresh look to it, fresh feel for the 90s. Yeah, I can definitely imagine this film, you know, hot out the gate being quite influential to a lot of people. What's interesting to note as well is the director, Martin Campbell. So Martin Campbell will return to direct a James Bond film, which will be in the guise of Casino Royale. I mean, the guy has directed 2 reboot films of the Bond franchise. Both, you know, great films in their own right, both decent films, and both so vastly different. It's, you know, within less than 10 years apart of each other, wasn't it? Or is it more than 10 years? Was it? No, Casino Royale was 2006, wasn't it? Yeah, so just over 10 years. And the films are so completely different. Watching Casino Royale and this one, you wouldn't think that it was the same director doing it. You like, there is nothing stylistically, both feel so completely different to me. So I think Martin Campbell's direction only got better with Casino Royale, which is one of my favorite Bond films, Casino Royale, which we'll talk about in a few weeks' time. Good to see you, SeaWorld man. He says, blue pillows with 2 exclamation mark. Yes, the laundry has been done. and thus I have new pillowcases on my bed, which don't really go with the decor of the room, I'll grant you, but I'm a simple guy, you know. I don't concern myself with those things. I'm like, do the pillows have pillowcases on? Yes, they do. Well, that's good enough for me. You know, blue be damned. It's fine. It's fine. You know, the sun will rise tomorrow. It's all going to be okay that I have blue pillowcases. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Um, let's talk about some of the other villains then. So there are a lot of villains in this film. You know, we're getting to the good one. Don't you worry, we're getting to the good one. I almost kind of want to save that character till last to talk about, so I'll see where it goes. See what man says. Oh, I thought you were going to say it's my second favorite Bond film. It's my second favorite color too. Yeah, blue's a cool color. Blue is a cool color. Let's talk about Colonel Arkady Grigorovich Oromov. Let's talk about him, played by Gottfried John. I feel like I've seen this actor in a film before and I can't place it, but he is fantastic. I love Oromov in this film. His facial expressions, his mannerisms, the way he carries himself. Great villain. You know, a lot of these kind of general villains can so very easily just be kind of one note, but there's just something about his performance, and the guy feels off. Like when you see him, like he feels nasty. He feels like a villain. What else can I say? I don't really know how to word it, and you know, that's nothing against the actor. You know, he's a fine actor, but yeah, I really like Oromov as a character. He's in it quite a bit in it, especially for like the first act into the second act. Like he's probably the most prominent villain. Sean Bean only really comes into it maybe by like the halfway point of the film. So yeah, love his character. You got some side characters in there too that I really appreciate. Let me find his name. You got Joe Don Baker back, who played the very strange villain in Living Daylights. You know, I've said go and check out my review on Living Daylights for more of my thoughts on Living Daylights, but I really enjoy that film. But my biggest criticism with the Living Daylights is that I find the villains, apart from Necros, to be completely terrible, including Joe Don Baker's character, and that's nothing against him as an actor. I think he's a brilliant actor. In fact, he's a fantastic character actor, but he just wasn't a intimidating, especially for the final villain for Dalton to take down. It's just such a weak villain, I find. But he's back in this inexplicably. I know that the Bond franchise isn't any stranger to bringing back cast members to play like different characters, but I do question why within 2 films' time we've brought this same actor back as a completely different character. Just he's not a villain. He's not the same character. He's an ally now. He feels very much, you know, he's part of the CIA and he feels like he's filling the place of a Felix Leiter character. I get they probably didn't want Felix's character back, especially regarding that the whole story pretty much of License to Kill, the film preceding this, revolved entirely around him, and you know, getting a new Felix Leiter might be strange to continue that story, or maybe they thought they'd got all the mileage they needed out of Felix Leiter. So to my memory, it won't be until Casino Royale rolls around again where we get our next Felix Leiter, but his character kind of serves the same thing, Jack Wade, and I think I love Jack Wade's character in this, by the way, and I think that Joe Don Baker just fits an ally much better than he does a villain. He wasn't intimidating. He's too likable a person, and his personality, you know, he really is a brilliant character actor, and he works perfectly alongside Brosnan as an ally. He's great, and he makes the character his own. He makes the character memorable. He's quite a serviceable character. You know, he just shows up occasionally to help out Bond or to give him some information or to point him in the right direction. But even just how he plays the character, and I don't know if this was ad-libbed, I don't know if this was in the script, but the guy likes plants. The guy is interested in trees and plants and stuff. You know, he'll just show up to a situation, he just goes like, banyan trees, and he just like he's admiring the horizon, he's admiring the trees, he's admiring those banyan trees, and then he'll continue with his line. It feels really weird and out of place, and then towards the end of the film he shows up and goes like, tobacco plants, and then he'll go on with his line. I don't know if that was something that Joe Don Baker as an actor threw in there just to give his character a little bit of personality, or if that was in the script. I'd be interested to know, but it's just little things like that that just make me laugh about the character and just seem to, I don't know, it gives the character a sense of history, doesn't it? And interests outside of the actual film, which, you know, all goes into forming the basis of a character. And I assume as an actor to get to grips with the character a little bit more, you can maybe make up a backstory for them or something like that. Let's have a look. Let's talk about Boris. So we got the brilliant Alan Cumming as Boris Grishenko. And I tell you what, those Russian names are just so fun to say. I love it. Alan Cumming is just a brilliant actor. He's really, really fantastic. And the character of Boris is just so goddamn memorable in this. It's probably the line that I quote the most from this film is, I'm invincible. He's very quirky, he's very weird. I love the whole, when I'm at work and I'm completely bored out of my tree, I'll be there with a pen, click, click, all that thing. It's great. It's all these mannerisms that go into characters that I absolutely love that just give them some staying power. It's like, she doesn't even have the access codes. Like, just the way he says lines, the way he gets taken out at the end with the liquid nitrogen. It's all very over the top and all very fun. I love Boris. He's great. I honestly don't know what else I can say about the characters. I feel like I'm being just so trite with my summation of these characters, just going like, yeah, I like him. He reminds me a little bit of, 2 years previously with Jurassic Park, you have Wayne Knight's character who's this, hacking into things. Yeah, hacking was big in the 90s, wasn't it? So I guess that's just something that carries over, just mashing a keyboard. I'm hacking into the mainframe. What does that even mean? And I'm not good with technology either. I always say that, computers hate me. So I love when during the action scene at the end in the edit, it just cuts to Boris just shaking this computer going like, speak to me. And it's like, yeah, I feel you, Boris. Like, I've had moments like that where I just have an absolute meltdown with my computer as well. Side character that I wanted to talk about as well is Robbie Coltrane's character as Valentin Sokovsky. Again, another brilliant Russian surname that are just so much fun to say. We will see Valentin return. That was probably my biggest surprise. The biggest welcoming thing in The World Is Not Enough, isn't it? He comes back in that one. Loved his character in this. It's such an amazing moment. It's a really good sense of world building as well. The brilliant line that Bond has when he's talking to Jodon Baker's character, and he says, "Oh, this guy's got a limp," and he says, "What, Valentin Sokovsky?" And he's like, "Oh, you know him?" He's like, "Yeah, I gave him the limp." And it's just, it's referring back to a past incident that we don't know about. And I always feel that fleshes out the James Bond lore, I guess, or the James Bond history, that he's gone on all these other missions before and ran into all these wonderful, colourful characters along the way. And it sets up that it sets up the dynamic instantly, doesn't it, between Bond and going into this situation. It really creates the tension before going in there. They really, really big up Valentin's character, that he's unpredictable, that he's dangerous, that doesn't Jack Wade's character say something like the last person who went in there left in air freight in multiple bags or something like that? And then Bond says something like, "Oh, well, I'll make sure that I leave in first class." It's just, there's some great one-liners in this film. And he's in, Valentin's like holed up in this dive bar, this really sleazy, like shitty club. And it's Minnie Driver, isn't it, who plays his mistress. And she's just, who strangled the cat, and she's just singing "Stand By Your Man." Stand by your man in the film. He's like, "That is my mistress." It's so shit, this bar. It's so shit, but I love stuff like that, like really sleazy, crappy, rundown places like this underground bar thing he's running, where, his business of operation. Robbie Coltrane's fantastic. And he's an imposing guy as well. He's a big guy. He's a big guy, and he's a tall guy as well. Like, he's imposing. So you could imagine that he'd fly off the rails at any point. But he does play it very tongue in cheek, which I like. He's one of the, he's sat on the chair, and he's got his two henchmen. He's got his two cronies behind him, and he says a joke, and he laughs, and he like looks around so that the henchmen can laugh as well. It's very cartoony in that way with the villain, but I like that he can identify James Bond's gun just from it cocking right next to his ear. Volta PPK. And then he knows exactly the same like millimeter of the gun and everything like that. It's a brilliant introduction to a character, and there's so many side characters that we've seen before with the Bond films, namely like John Rhys Davis' character is General Pushkin, who I believe even with this film as well, they reached out to him to see if he wanted to return for it, and he kept turning it down. So it's nice sometimes where we see a character return. It's very rare that we do outside of, like the main ensemble, but It's brilliant to see Robbie Coltrane come back in The World Is Not Enough, but we're a couple of weeks away from that one, so we'll park that there for now. We'll come back to it because he's a pivotal character in that next film. Okay. I think I've you know what? I'm going to save the best till last. Let's talk about our Bond girl first. So we've got Isabella Scorupco, I think. I'm butchering that last name. Playing the character of Natalia. I really like Natalia in this, and you can see a shift with this film. You absolutely can see a shift with this film in terms of how it handles some of its female characters. Granted, in a couple of films' time, where we get Dr. Christmas, is that her name? That feels like a step back, but certainly within that 6-year time period, I think there was much more of a shift to political correctness, not to the stage that it is now with media. Now it's absolutely fucking ridiculous now with a lot of mainstream media, but you can definitely see a shift in its attitude and its attitude towards the Bond character as well. But the difference is with this film, you have more of those moments. We have our first female M with, Dame Judi Dench, who not only for the Brosnan films into the Daniel Craig films as well, and is just a staple of the Bond franchise now, in my opinion, and like the Bond history. She's phenomenal. Absolutely. She's my favorite M, actually. I must admit, I absolutely adore Judi Dench in the role, and she plays it well. She's domineering. She can rein people in. She's intimidating. She's really intimidating. She's just great. But you can tell that she, deep down under the hard-faced exterior that she has, she's got a heart of gold. She has that moment where she sits down and she says, like, if you think that I have any qualms about sending an agent to his death, like, I don't. Like, I will send you to your death if I wish, but I won't do it on a whim. And then right before Bond leaves the office, she's like, Bond, come back alive. So I really love that dynamic with it. And you could even say that, especially with the Craig ones, whether this was the right move or not, obviously we'll discuss that once we get to the likes of Skyfall. It was almost like a mother-son relationship in many ways. And that ties into the villain as well with Silver, who I think he even calls her mommy or something, doesn't he? At one point in the film, he was like, "Mommy was very bad." It's, very strange. We'll pick up we'll do a psychological analysis on Silver's character once we get to Skyfall. But I do think as the dynamic went on, could even say the same with Q in this film with Desmond Llewellyn. I think that once you get to these films, I loved his dynamic with Timothy Dalton. But with this film, alongside Pierce Brosnan, it almost feels like a granddad-grandson kind of thing. And there's that banter back and forth, and they love each other really. They're great with each other, and they respect each other. And there's a bit more of a jokey back and forth, getting on each other's nerves kind of thing with this one, which I really appreciate. Which is a dynamic we haven't really seen in any of the previous ones. And I wonder if that's because Desmond Llewellyn obviously aging a lot more in this film. He's a much more older man than he has been before. It's funny how time works. As the years go by, people get older. It's strange that, isn't it? But I think in turn that also does change the dynamic between Bond and Q very much in these films. And I guess that kind of happened the same with Dame Judi Dench as well. Once you get to the Craig films, that they really kind of delve into that relationship a lot more between the two of them. Certainly when you get to Skyfall, that's basically the crux of that whole film. In many ways, M is kind of the Bond girl of Skyfall. But as I say, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it is the introduction of a female M. As I was saying, it's very different, who calls him out very blatantly, saying that Bond, I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur and a relic of the Cold War. It kind of spells out what the studios feared, that the character was completely pointless at that point and outdated and wouldn't fit the current times. We have a new Miss Moneypenny as well, played by Samantha Bond, who I always say must have got the job based on her surname. It's a wonderful coincidence. Samantha Bond as Miss Moneypenny. I prefer her to the one, I've forgotten her name already, the one that was in The Living Daylights and very, very briefly in License to Kill. We didn't really get much of her. And I still kind of feel the same way for Samantha Bond in these films. We don't really get much of a dynamic between her and Bond, just down to the fact that she's in more films than the previous Miss Moneypenny was. I have to say that I enjoy her a lot more. But even then, Samantha Bond, there's just something missing. There's something missing. The dynamic's not quite the same, and you get that as well. There's a little bit of flirtation there still, which is kind of synonymous. Like I feel like you need to have that with Bond and Miss Moneypenny, which is something that I think the latest films just completely neglected. But it hits differently, and I was noticing that more a lot tonight. That clearly there was a change in terms of how we're going to address the Bond character. We're maybe going to call him out a little bit more now. That he is a sexist, that he does go through women like like there's no tomorrow. And that there's going to be these women that are going to, that are going to chastise him basically and kind of put him in his place and be not afraid to be more domineering. There's a lot of dominant women in this film, which take us very nicely onto some of the other characters. Even the Bond girl in this one, Natalia, as I was saying, I really like her character, and I like that she's sassy, she's headstrong, she's capable. But despite all of this, like the more political correctness, comparatively to some of the other Bond films at least, it doesn't betray the core of Bond's character. Like, he will still save the day. He is still the masculine hero. He's still going to get the girl. He's still the action star, and he's still capable, and he's still not getting, he's not getting overshadowed by anyone else. And that's the approach that I feel like you get with a modern take on Bond now, is that they'd go over the top with it. He still retains all of the core aspects of what we come to expect and what we kind of demand from the Bond character, really, from a good depiction of Bond. But there are all of these other factors in at work. So it's like a beautiful marriage between all of that. So whilst you notice it and you go, oh, okay, things have definitely become a lot more progressive with this film, which isn't a bad thing at all, it still retains the quality of Bond, which is what I really appreciate about the Brosnan ones. And as I said, I really love Natalia, just absolutely gorgeous, capable. When she's in a fight, she will rely on Bond to, get stuck in and like clear the path and like gun everyone down. She's the hacker, she's the programmer, and she's going to do that side of things. And Bond's completely clueless with that. And that's, highlighted beautifully where they're locked in on the train and she's trying to find out the location of Boris by hacking into the computer. And Bond's completely clueless. She's like, you need me to change the access codes and everything. And then when Bond stops, she's like, well, don't stop, carry on finding us a way out of here. And I love that. I love that she's not afraid to call him out. One of my favorite lines from her in this film isn't to Bond, actually. It's when she tries to get some computers to first reach out to Boris after she's escaped. And she basically just says, like, I want this computer, I want these computers, I want this modem, and I want it now, kind of thing. And he's like, would you like a tour of the facility? She's like, no, just get it done. But my favorite line is where she's on the computer, she's talking to Boris in like this secret chat room type thing. And then the guy comes in, he says like, oh, is everything okay? And she's like, everything except the interruption. Just immediately puts him in his place. I'm like, oof, yeah, you're a sassy one. I like it. So I really like her character. There's a very perplexing scene in the film, which always it kind of feels like a like a kind of a pickup or like a reshoot or something. And it's where she has this heart-to-heart with Bond, and it just comes completely out of nowhere, and it's really weird. And the color palette of the film, or the green screen, whatever the hell on it, looks like a nuclear bomb's just gone off in the background. It's at sunset, but the colors are like really dialed up, and you can't tell me that any of that is natural lighting. It looks very garish and like out of place, and Bond's having like this wistful moment, and you could almost write a scene like this in your sleep, and it's just like, Alec was once your friend and now he's your enemy, and you feel bad that you now have to fight him and one of you will die, and all of this stuff. It just feels very out of place. It feels very tacked on. So I'm not too keen on that scene. That's probably one of my least favorite scenes in the film, to be honest. Right. I've done enough delaying. I now welcome you to the Goldeneye Sim Power. We got to talk about Famke Jenssen's character. We got to talk about Xenia Onatopp. Her character is quite possibly one of my favorite female characters in any piece of media ever. I think she's absolutely wonderful. Very different character to anything we've seen in Bond before. Really wacky out there as a concept. Is a phenomenal henchwoman, and Famke Jensen just looks like she's having so much fun playing this character and brings so much personality to Xenia Onatopp. Number one, she's bloody gorgeous, but number two, like, you don't know, she's just hilarious. Like, the moment she dispatches of that admiral, it's just seeing how much she's getting turned on by killing people or causing harm to people. It's hilarious. It's like a dark comedy. But it's all of like her little ticks and everything like that, her facial expressions, the way she's basically like reaching, she'll gun down a whole room of people and she'll basically be like reaching orgasm. It's such a strange concept for a character in a Bond film. And I tell you what, I'm here for every single second of it. This is what I mentioned. It's the Xenia Onatopp sim power, and I'm going to own it. I'm going to fucking own it. Nikki, if you're still watching, we talked about like feminine energy in like, you know, how important it is for characters. Xenia Onatopp exudes feminine energy to a whole other degree. And I love that she kind of meets a match with Bond. One of my favorite scenes, and, you know, you couldn't have like a punch 'em up. Of course you couldn't have that, but it is where they're in like the health spa and both of them are trying to dominate each other essentially. And she, by God, she does it very well. I'll give her that. But, you know, then Bond's like slamming her into walls and she's like, oh, you think you can break me? And then she'll like start crushing him even more between her thighs. And then Bond will like throw her into a wall or something. And she's like getting turned on by it. Like, she is trying to kill Bond, but it's almost like foreplay to her. It's like a cat and mouse thing, like she's playing with her prey. I can't say enough positive things about Xenia Onatopp. And actually, surrounding the character, I love her. I love the introduction to a character, by the way, that we immediately get the sense of what this character's like and how, you know, she is equally matched with Bond, you know, during that whole that race essentially at the beginning where they're trying to compete with each other and try and dominate each other. Love that. I love the back and forth. I love when Bond's like driving past, like, it's very Roger Moore, and he like does the double take or he smiles at the passerby in the car or the helicopter or whatever it happens to be. It reminds me of The Spy Who Loved Me when he does that with, I forgot the name of the character. She's in the helicopter, isn't she? And he kind of double takes and gives her the wink, gives her the smile. Brilliant introduction to the character. And then I love at the Monte Carlo casino as well, where we then put Bond in another familiar situation. And he mentions that. He says, like, I think we share the same passions. You know, first it's fast cars and both of them are equally matched, and then they sit down to play baccarat, and it's a brilliant scene. It's seeing Bond in a casino. He just feels so at home in that environment, doesn't he? It's a really good introduction, and that's of course how we were introduced to Sean Connery's Bond back in the day with Dr. No. So because this is like a reboot of the franchise, and, you know, completely revitalized the image of Bond for the 90s, it's cool to then reintroduce Bond into that casino environment, you know, in the suit, all suited and booted and everything, playing cards against Xenia Onatopp, and the back and forth's wonderful, the innuendos and everything. The two have really great chemistry together. The one thing that I don't like about Xenia's character, and it's nothing against necessarily the character, it's just how the character's dispatched in the film, how she's killed off. It feels like it's filmed on a very flat angle. It feels very... It feels less filmic. It doesn't feel very cinematic like the whole fight. There's other fight scenes later on in the film, and, you know, the tank chases easily like the walk away, one of the best set pieces in the film, and feels very filmic. Whereas, and, you know, like the fist fight between Alec and James, where it's almost like the Red Grant fight from Russia with Love, where they're just giving it their own, and these two people are just beating the shit out into each other. They're throwing each other into walls, they're putting each other through tables, you know, kicking each other down ladders and stuff like that. They're really going for it. But the final fight with Xenia just feels quite cheap and a little bit weak, and just how she's taken out. I don't necessarily have a problem with how she's taken out. You know, she's hooked up to the wire, and when the helicopter goes down, it yanks her back, and it basically breaks her back, I assume, doesn't it? Or breaks a neck or something in the tree. But there's no sound effect, and I always think that her death would have had more impact with like a breaking bone sound effect, or like hearing her neck snap, or hearing the back break or something like that. As it is, it just feels very flat and lacks impact, and it's a bit of a shame because, she's such a breath of fresh air in this film, and she's legitimately my favorite character. She looks like she's having so much fun with every single line, every single moment of being in this film, and it's great to see. And of course, the character. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. But so yeah, the death scene. You want it to be memorable. You want it to have impact, and I don't feel like Xenia Onatop's death does. My favorite Xenia line. It's when they're on the train and Bond parks the tank in front of the tracks. He's basically playing not playing chicken with them, but he ain't moving. He's a man who means business. He's parked that tank on the tracks for a reason. And she's just like, oh, he's going to derail us. And she's getting like turned on about it. It's like, you're on the enemy's side. Like, it's your train that's getting derailed, but she's just like, oh, he's going to derail us. I don't know why, but that line just always gets me. The way she delivers it. The bit as well where she guns everyone down in the facility when they first take the Goldeneye. And she's like, breathing heavily. She's getting turned on and she's gunning everyone down. And it feels like she's almost coming down from an orgasm after she's just dispatched with the entire room. And then the camera slowly pans to Oromov. He's just looking like, what the fuck? What's wrong with you? Just little moments like that. It's just all of the characters in this are really strong. I think every single one. I don't think there's a weak character in this film, and that's the strength of Goldeneye to me, is its characters and not necessarily its plot, because the plot it feels very safe. It feels like a very back to basics, like we're hitting the hard reset. We've had 6 years, we can get things together. We need to repackage, rebrand this thing, get it out there, and let's take the ingredients of what has made a strong Bond film in the past, and we've got another space laser. So it feels very classic in many ways. It blends a lot of the whole classic tropes of Bond, and it's blended beautifully with that 90s twist on it, with a more modern edge to it. So I guess in that regard it is a success. I just don't know what it is with the film. I genuinely think what it could be, and I'm not being a contrarian here, I think it could just be all the hype that surrounds this film. Maybe when I first went into this film last year, the hype was just at this level. It was selling out. Goldeneye, oh, it's one of the best. The best. Brosnan's fantastic. Goldeneye, it's one of the best. It might be the best Bond film ever made. And then I watched it and I was like, it's okay. It's okay. But there are loads of other Bond films that I prefer and would rather watch over Goldeneye. Xenia Onatop notwithstanding. Let's talk about some of the action then. So as I mentioned, like the opening scene, I think it's a great opener. Lacks impact due to the music, and I'll get onto the music in just a second. That's going to be like a running theme for me, is going to be the music lacks impact. The one time where the music doesn't lack impact, and is probably one of the best set pieces in the film, is the whole tank chase through St. Petersburg. And the reason being of that is that what's his name? Eric Serra didn't do the music for that scene. He did compose a song for that scene, and you can find that on the album. It's called A Pleasant Drive in St. Petersburg, which is the original composed music for what that scene was going to be. However, it was rejected by the director because he hated it. And as such, in that moment, we actually get the classic James Bond fanfare, and it's like full orchestra, and the whole mood of the film changes just based on that soundtrack alone. And that was John Altman who provided the music for that sequence and those more classic sounds that kick in. There is one other piece of music in the film that I really enjoy, and I don't know the name of it as a track listing, but it first plays when Bond goes to the Monte Carlo casino at the beginning and meets Xenia Onatop in person, actually has a conversation with her. It's this beautiful, romantic, almost love theme, this sweeping string sections, very melancholy, and I think it comes back later on in the film too. And it just sounds so nice. It's genuinely a beautiful melody. So I'd keep that, and I'd get like John Altman to score the rest of the film. We're on to the music. Let's talk about the music. So Goldeneye, the main theme, written by Bono and The Edge, which actually I didn't find out until I watched it for the first time last year. I always thought this was, well, I didn't necessarily think that Tina Turner wrote the song, but I certainly didn't think that Bono wrote the song. And as such, with him writing the song, I'm surprised that he didn't want to do the Bond song himself. and that he actually showed restraint there. Tina Turner's just a powerhouse vocalist, evokes those kind of Shirley Bassey sensibilities with this one. It does feel in many ways like a classic Bond song. The fault lies within the rest of the musical score, because usually, not always the case, but very often than not, more so in the John Barry score, he'd work in the main theme. He'd work in the main title theme into the actual score itself, and you'd have like a beautiful variation of it, you know, orchestral piece. And those are always the best to me. But because Eric Serra is just... I mean, I'm not going to knock him as a composer, because writing music is difficult, and anyone that can write music, let alone a score to a film, is tremendous in my opinion. You know, they are a genius. To write music in any capacity, especially for a film, you're automatically a genius in my regard. But he just wasn't the composer that was suited to James Bond. And if he got the gig for this, it just feels like he really didn't step up. He didn't step up to the plate to do a Bond soundtrack. He missed everything that made a Bond soundtrack great. The grandiose, the raunchiness of a Bond soundtrack, the energy, the romance, everything that goes into a Bond soundtrack. And it feels like an experiment in many ways. It just feels like this really mundane, monotone, industrial... I mean, it's the 90s, isn't it? Of course it is. But it almost feels like this experimental industrial album. You've got these... It almost feels like the drums in the soundtrack are someone like banging a metal drum in a warehouse, and you've got like loads of echo on it. It feels like Saint Anger. If you're a Metallica fan, Saint Anger. That's what it sounds like. That really kind of grungy, weird, computerized, synthesized 90s industrial stuff. And I'm just saying words right now. That's the only way that I can describe this score, and it just lacks impact. There are so many scenes that would have benefited from a rescore, and just a score in general. One of the scenes that I feel really lacks impact is the beginning, which takes you into the main theme of Goldeneye. You have the bit where Bond launches himself off with the plane, is in free fall. He gets himself inside the plane, and you know, it's that classic thing where it goes out of camera shot, it goes silent. You're like, oh no, Bond's dead. And then vroom, and then the plane revs up and, you know, fly. So many different films do that. That's like a trope in loads of films. But when that plane ramps up, you want that Bond theme to be kicking in. You want some kind of fanfare, you know. Imagine that scene where it all goes quiet. Bond's back on the big screen. That plane revs up and then ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. That would have been tremendous. Something like that, you know, that Bond fanfare or something to that effect, taking you into that brass, you know, that raunchiness of the Goldeneye theme, that sassy, sexy song that it is, which is everything a Bond song needs to be. It would have fit so well. So as such, to bring it back, Goldeneye by Tina Turner, absolute powerhouse Bond song, but the score just doesn't mesh with that song for me. And that's not a fault of Tina Turner. Keep Goldeneye by Tina Turner, change the fucking soundtrack, you know, change the score. Therein lies the problem with this film. And I mean, I don't know if a fan editor's done that, if someone's edited the film and extracted the music out of it and rescored and recomposed the film with a whole new soundtrack. I would love to watch that version of Goldeneye, and I think that would actually... Music makes a film, so maybe with maybe with an elevated soundtrack to it, that would help my experience with the film. Speaking of experience, let's talk about The Experience of Love, which is our other Bond song that features in the film and is just a complete Eric Serra ego trip. Apparently the song The Experience of Love, which is the closing credits song, it's based on a short cue apparently that Serra composed the previous year for the film Leon, the Professional. I've only watched that film once and I can't remember the soundtrack to that, but I imagine a soundtrack similar to Goldeneye would work for something like Leon. It doesn't work for a Bond theme. But The Experience of Love, I mean, fuck. What can I even say about this song? You know, I've got on record last year calling it an absolute wet fart of a song. And it is. It's just this meandering, ambient, trite bullshit that goes on for so long, and that ain't an end credit song to a Bond theme. You know, we've had romantic ones before, but they've always usually fit in with the soundtrack. I think the first one to do it was The Living Daylights, wasn't it? With If There Was a Man. But that works in because that works into the love that, you know, John Barry, that was the love theme with Cara in that film. License to Kill, if you ask me to, ties in with the line from the film, you know, and I don't know if anyone else has picked up for it in Pam Bouvier's theme in License to Kill. There, to me, maybe it's just me listening for it, there's a very, very subtle hint to the chord progression from the chorus of If You Ask Me To. That's what my ear takes me to anyway. I don't know if other people have noticed that. Maybe I'm way off base on that one. It's just a coincidence. But then The Experience of Love, I just have nothing to say. I have nothing to say about The Experience of Love. It's just a dreary crap song that, you know, you finished Goldeneye, the return to form with Bond, you want it to end on, like, hell, even end it on Tina Turner's Goldeneye again in the credits. You know, just give us something. Don't end it on Experience of Love. It's just a really, really fucking boring song. The other thing to notice, to mention as well, there was a rejected Bond theme for this film by the band Ace of Base, called Goldeneye, which you can find on YouTube. When it was turned down, actually, I think it was the record label, Arista Records or something like that. They pulled the band out of the project because they said if the film was a flop or it was, you know, it would have a negative impact on their career. So they passed up the opportunity to score, well, not to score, but to provide the main song for Bond, for the new Bond film. That is ridiculous to me, but you know, it's questionable decisions. I hope they got a new record company after that, because that was ridiculous. Later on, they took that song that was rejected and they rewrote it and reorchestrated it, and it's now their single, The Juvenile, which is, you know, it's an all right song in its own regard. I really like Ace of Base's Goldeneye. I think it would have been a strong opener. I think it arguably maybe would have fit the film more than Tina Turner's Goldeneye. I feel like Tina Turner's Goldeneye is too good. It's too throwbacky, and this is not me bashing, by the way, Goldeneye by Tina Turner. I think it's too good. I think that, you know, if you had a David Arnold soundtrack, if you had like another John Barry soundtrack with Goldeneye, that would have fit beautifully. And I can even imagine like what an orchestral version of that song would have sounded like within the film itself. It just doesn't mesh. Whereas I think you can't get more 90s. Well, actually you can. Ace of Base is so 90s. They're so 90s. And I feel like that would have fit the film a little bit better. The lyrics as well. I mean, the lyrics are so on the nose though to Ace of Base's Goldeneye. There is legitimately a lyric in the song that says, "We're in the 90s. Nothing is the same. The Cold War is replaced by different actors using different names." That is a legitimate lyric, which is a absolutely diabolical and terrible lyric to a song. Like, how much more on the nose can you get? So lyrics aside, I really like the melody, and it's got this really kind of dark, mysterious quality to it, and it's got like a 90s backing beat to it. I think it would have worked really well. I think it would have been a solid theme. And even if not the main theme for the film, put it as the end credit song then. Just don't give me Experience of Love. I never want to hear that theme again. Experience of Love is on my Bond playlist on Spotify because it's a Bond song and it's available on Spotify, but it's always skipped. Every single time it's always skipped. It's so terrible. But anyway, I've ranted on the music enough. Any other scenes and stuff that I really like in this film? I feel like I've pretty much said everything. Oh God, sorry guys, I've been up all day. It's been a busy day today between work and driving around and getting shit done. I just made this film at the cinema as well. I finished work at 7 and it's a 40-minute drive to get to the cinema. So yeah, it was touch and go, but luckily I managed to get there and I'm looking forward to next week. So just in summary, Goldeneye. Is it a good film? Yes. Is it a good Bond film? Absolutely. Is it fun to watch? Yep. Cast of characters, brilliant. Is the action good in the film? Yes. Is the soundtrack good? No. The soundtrack is not good. And I do think that if this film had a more classic sounding soundtrack, I genuinely think the whole mood of the film would change. The whole thing would be transformed. And as I said, I'm going to have to do some digging. If there is a fan edit out there of Goldeneye where someone has gone in and replaced the music, I'm open to that. And I would love to check that out and see if the feel of the film is different, because music is so important to a film. I don't think sometimes we really appreciate how important music is in film. Is this one of my favorite Bond films? It's difficult to say now that I've watched them all again. So if you guys would like to see a ranking after all 25 are done, I know that with James Bond rankings, that it's like a thing that's just constantly changing. And, you know, if I ever do another Bond marathon again, not reviews, I'll do it at my own time next time. I don't want to repeat myself for a third time, but I'm sure my favorites will chop and change again after that. But would this make it into my top 10? I don't know. I don't know at this point. I like the characters, but there's something about the film that's just... I don't know if it's because it's coming off the back of License to Kill, and that's a film that felt so different, that's tone felt so much more adult and mature, and I really appreciated that about it. That this one just feels like, oh, we're back to this, are we? That could be the reason. It could be the music. Could be just like the 90s feel to it. I don't know. But I do like this film. I do. Do I think it's as deserving as the hype that everyone surrounds it? I think nostalgia. I think it's very nostalgic to a lot of people. And nostalgia is a powerful thing. It's an incredibly powerful thing. It's why I don't revisit a lot of the stuff that I watched as a kid, you know, like certain cartoons and everything. Not counting some Disney films, but I'm always worried to go back and watch some of those films and go, this is absolutely trash. Because that's a horrible feeling, you know, getting older, you know, you become more critical, you become more aware of things. And dare I say, maybe you lose that childhood innocence that just, you know, made films like this great. So I think a lot of it with me with this film is that when I saw this for the first time last year, and just, I mean, you can't really escape it, can you? The hype for Goldeneye is everywhere. You know, it's coming at you from the films, it's coming at you from the Bond community, and it's coming at you from the video games. Do I think it's justified in all of that hype? For me personally, no. I mean, this is a fine Bond film. I enjoy it. It's good fun. But I don't think it's like the best thing since sliced bread. And I think there are much better Bond films out there than Goldeneye. That's just my opinion. That's my opinion. I do enjoy it, though. So don't take that as me hating on Goldeneye. I am not hating on Goldeneye. I just think for me personally, it's not quite at that level of hype that a lot of people hold it up to. So I guess. Anyway, I'm repeating myself now at this point. We've got over an hour. It's very late and I'm very tired and I need sleep because I've got another busy day again tomorrow. But I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in once again. You guys make it all the more worth it to come on and chat Bond. It's an absolute pleasure. I look forward to it each week. Not only do I get to see a Bond film on the big screen, which is an absolute privilege, I get to come on and talk about it, and you guys actually tune in and listen to it, which is great. So thank you very much. Do be sure to subscribe to the channel for more movie reviews, discussions, and live streams. Newer movies seem to be a bit slow at the moment. I'm waiting on when Prey, the new Predator film's coming out, because I've heard mixed to positive things about that film, and I think it'll be interesting to check out. And I've seen all the other Predator films, so at this point, in for a penny, in for a pound. How much worse can it get after the Predator? Not to mention, I've got a early screener for something which I'm not at liberty to divulge what that actually is at the moment, but it's coming soon, and I cannot wait. I'm just going to leave it there. So for more information on that, obviously follow me on my Twitter. You can find me at Hobbit Fan Editor. I'll post all information on there, updates, reviews that you can expect to see. I'm already planning on what I want to do, like another franchise to take on of films or another series of films to take on after I finish the James Bond ones, because, you know, we've got 3 weeks of the Pierce Brosnan ones, and we've got a month, just over a month of the Daniel Craig ones. Then we're into the month of October. So I need to think of some fun things to do for October. Now, I might touch on some horror stuff, but would you guys like to see me dip into some horror franchise or something like that? I would love to do that. I'm a massive horror fan, and it's never really been a franchise I've talked about all that much, you know, or a genre, sorry, of films that I've talked about. So I've got some ideas, you know, some director retrospectives I'd love to go through personally. And this is all me just being selfish. These are genuinely films that I want to see. They might be films that I haven't seen that I really want to cross off my personal list. And, you know, like Bond, I just like to see the progression of franchises, for better or worse, and series of films. So I've got a lot of ideas. There's plenty of material. I'm going to stay true to the Bonds first. We're going to get that out of the way. And then I've got a lot of stuff planned for the end of the year. So do follow me on Twitter. I'll post more information about that as and when we get to it. And in the meantime, if you haven't done so already, let me know what you think of Goldeneye. Is this one of your favorite James Bond films? Did you grow up with this film? Do you just find it okay? Is it your favorite Brosnan film out of the Bond films that he did? Anything regarding Goldeneye or Bond in general, do let me know. And of course, next week, we're at Tomorrow Never Dies. I'm really looking forward to that one. I have good memories with that one, watching it last year. And I can't wait to see it on the big screen and see if I have differing opinions on it. That's going to be next Tuesday. That's going to be the 16th of August. I can't believe we're midway through August already. At the same time, again, 11:30 p.m. British Standard Time. I am going to try and be on time, guys. I always try and be on time. I don't like keeping you guys waiting. But we'll see. And in the meantime, let me know what your favorite James Bond film is. Maybe it's Goldeneye. Let me know who your favorite actor to play Bond is. Maybe it's Pierce Brosnan. Who knows? Final thank you to everyone that's watched tonight. You guys are the best. Hopefully you all have a good night. Stay safe. And I'll catch you all guys on the next review. See ya.